Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week. With us is Stephen Erlanger of the New York Times. Also with us, Michael Kirtley, journalist and documentary filmmaker. Also with us, Ulrike Kolterman, whose next book is on...
French nuclear power.
Have you got a working title yet?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm changing.
You're changing every day. All right. And France 24 senior correspondent Mathieu Mabin. On Wednesday, we aired the feature film by Mathieu and Sophia Amarat for Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. It took them 3 weeks to get in and out of the country with the Free Syrian Army. When they got to the capital in late July, what day was it exactly? It was the 22nd, you told me?
22nd.
22nd of July. They were surprised to discover that already the Battle of Damascus had genuinely begun.
Damascus. At first sight, the city looks calm, but all night long, small units of rebels have been sneaking in, infiltrating different districts, using passageways, even the sewers. By morning, some 300 Free Syrian Army fighters have entered the district of Tadamoun. The rebels have staked out their battleground. They say they're waiting for an attack by the army.
It fell there, come.
There's an injured man, go on.
Who's been killed?
2 children, my mother, my father and my aunt, all in the same house. The house was bombed.
How old were your children?
They were twins, 3 years old.
And that's an edited version of the full report, which you can see on the France 24 website. Mathieu Mabin, you were mentioning in part one of The World This Week how Syria is not Libya. You covered the conflict in Libya. And here what we see is determined fighters, even though they don't have that air superiority that the regime has, they knew what they were doing.
Yes, absolutely. You've heard this man who was telling face to our camera that he's lost his family. Every time the rebellion faces the regime and the Syrian army, the regular Syrian army, this army must fight back and send bombs and shell the cities and kill people. And that makes the Free Syrian Army popular. Every time some civilians die, some men reach the rebellion and are ready to face Bashar al-Assad. This man was not particularly sympathetic to the revolution probably a week ago, but after he's lost everything, what can he do? He would give his life really, really easily to kill Bashar al-Assad himself.
What's interesting is there's determination on both sides.
Yes, it is very difficult for me to talk about the determination on the other side because I didn't see them. There is an interesting point we didn't really put in the report, but lightly put in the report. The war is not as simple as we show it. It's always much more complicated. When we entered Syria, we entered a small city called Zabadani under the shelling. 2 units of the regular army was in charge of this area, one Alawi and one Sunni. And we realized that at the end of the shelling, there was a fight between those 2 parts of the regular army because the Sunni just wanted the shelling to stop because some men of this unit were just from the city, from Zabadani. We were very surprised. We've never heard about such a situation. This is a war in Syria. This is a war between Syrian people, between Sunni, between Alawi. We met some Alawi in the rebellion. It is so complicated.
It's complicated, and at the same time, as we were mentioning in part one, Ulrike Kolterman, it seems as though everyone's fixing for a fight.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, you also need to see that there are a lot of defections. So yes, Assad is very decided, but he has nothing to lose. And when you see all these people who have defected already, high-ranking military, politicians, old friends of Assad, so a very probable solution is not a military collapse, but something coming from inside, like a coup d'etat, a putsch from someone close to him. And then the big question is what will happen, because then it's not one victory of the unified rebels, but it's just Assad has gone, and what comes next? That's the biggest question, and not the military defeat of Assad, I think.
Any signs, well, you mentioned that firefight between the Alawites and the Sunnis, but any signs that Syria is the same sort of powder keg as Lebanon, for instance, when it comes to all the various different groups that may be there?
We've heard many times, it doesn't mean I believe it, but we've heard many times Syria and Lebanon were one country, finally. Particularly on the border, it is very interesting. When we cross the border through a village, which is half Syrian, half Lebanese. The couples are half Syrian, half Lebanese, and the children are of both nationality. So yes, the stories of those two countries, which were one in the past, are very close. So of course, the situation in Lebanon, which is one more time very complicated, and we can see it right now with the contamination from the Syrian conflict to Lebanon. Yes, one region, probably one problem. I would say 100 problem.
And also you have the complication of Iran and Hezbollah, and Hezbollah acting in a fashion as a sort of helper for Iran's ally in Damascus. Those are the reports. They make sense. Syria never recognized the border. They never recognized Lebanon as a separate country. What worries me is a collapse. I mean, it's not like we would wish Assad back, but if the whole regime collapses, we'll have Iraq again. And we saw what happened in Iraq when the Americans came in and dismantled everything. There were years of chaos and murder and internecine fighting. And this is what really worries me about Syria. It's not that people have bad motives. It's just that if chaos rules, then this is why it seems to me the West has a real responsibility to try to ensure that that doesn't happen, that they act in some fashion before it all collapses to create an opposition that is actually capable of taking over and providing order once the Assad regime, in whatever reason, whatever manner, falls. Because at this point, I think, for the first time in a year, it seems to me very clear that Assad is very much losing ground. He cannot control the country. And the minute he moves here, other people are acting up. The Kurds have created their own little area. There are zones of autonomy all over Syria. And it's becoming a very big danger for the region and, I think, for the West.
And this is the reason why the Western democracy are so shy with this situation. It's not only about removing a dictator.
I think the Kurdish question is underestimated, because this comes very close to Europe, because when the Kurdish are getting more and more autonomous in Syria, then Turkey gets nervous, and so it doesn't only spill over into Lebanon and maybe Israel or Iran and Hezbollah, but there's also a problem on the other side. So.
All right, the wariness all around. We're going to switch continents now. South Africa is in shock this Friday. The songs of mourning and protest of another era, it seems, after the killing of at least 34 picketers at the Lonmin Platinum Mine in Marikana in the north of the country. Police opened fire on the Wildcat strikers with live ammunition, that country's worst massacre since 1985, back in the days of apartheid. With the images of Thursday's massacre played over and over on television, President Zuma cutting short his visit to a regional summit in Mozambique. There's a lot of layers to this story, Michael Kirtley, but there is huge shock, and not just in South Africa, on the whole continent.
Well, yes, we have to always understand South Africa in the context of how it sees itself as a leader and a model for the rest of the continent. And certainly that image itself has suffered in many ways over the past few years due to the escalating violence there. in general terms, and kind of due to the economic difficulties that the country's going through. But in this particular situation, you have the ANC that's very linked, very entangled even with the main mining union, the NUM, who you would have to say they were in cahoots to try to put down this particular.
There was one-upmanship with a smaller trade union.
It's sort of an upstart trading union, the NMCU. So I think that what you're going to see there is a real reevaluation of the role of the ANC. I cannot imagine a trauma like this taking place within South Africa without a lot of political reevaluation and political fallout.
In the past, Ulrika Kohlerman, we've talked about how the grace period for Jacob Zuma may be over, but he seems each time to have weathered the storm. In this particular case, there's going to be a lot of soul searching. I want you to react to the front page of the Sowetan this Friday, a graphic photo spread with of the killing, with an editorial in which it's written that we are trying to expose the full extent of the tragedy with the hope that it will arouse enough outrage to stop such mayhem by publishing an image of this nature on the front page. But we wonder whether there isn't a numbness that comes with the death of an African. The conclusion they draw is that all these years after the end of apartheid, life is still cheap in South Africa.
Yeah, and one thing is interesting about Zuma, he didn't say anything about the reaction of the police. He didn't judge. And I think many people expected something from him. And the bad thing is that all these images, they are a reminder of the apartheid. Police on one side, civilians on the other side. These images will have their effect on the people's mind, even though the issue is different. It's not an apartheid issue anymore, but it's just the same situation and lots of people killed. And when you ask for the reasons, then it's very easy to lead to the ANC and all these promises which were not fulfilled, and the people are still waiting, and transformation is too slow, and especially the mining sector is still a very wide monopoly. So in a way, it is still linked to apartheid.
All right, it's certainly taking the veneer off the Rainbow Nations image. For Kudzai from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, on the France 24 World This Week Facebook page, he says, it shows the story of African leaders willing to suppress in exchange for foreign direct investment or cash money. We shouldn't be fooled by this growth of Africa's GDP by exporting minerals, Stephen Erlinger.
Well, I have to say, all I could think of was Sharpeville. I think that was 1960. That was a long time ago. But I mean, that was a very important part of revolutionizing the country. And I think it's a shock for the country. It's a shock for the police. One hopes it will produce a degree of change. I mean, South Africa is, it's a marvelous example if it works. I mean, and it's a very rich country. Why shouldn't it take advantage of the wealth in the ground? The question is, how is that wealth used? Is it spread properly? Is it honest? Is it transparent? Are the police following the law? I mean, these are questions.
Just to hammer home that point here,
Yes.
They're striking because they earn the equivalent of 400 euros a month, and they work in underground in temperatures that can reach 60 degrees Celsius at times.
Yeah, I mean, mines are horrible. Ask a lot of Chinese miners and Polish miners. I mean, mines are really bad. Or Kentuckians, West Virginians. But, the fact of the matter is, I think it's better than it used to be. I mean, it's got to be seen, again, as a sort of transition, and one hopes a shock like this is an impetus for improvement, that's all.
And keep in mind also that 400 euros you're talking about is the same salary they've had for the last 20 years.
All right, meanwhile, we're going to just talk about what's going on in the UK capital, where a stakeout continues. Police posted outside the Ecuadorian embassy in London's posh Knightsbridge district, a handful of protesters there too to defend WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Assange getting support on the other side of the globe as well, in his native Australia, from activists who believe Britain's decision to honor Sweden's extradition request on sexual assault charges are a smokescreen for the next step, which would be extradition to the U.S., where he could face the death penalty for leaking state secrets. Ecuador's decision to offer asylum to Assange, enough to trigger an emergency meeting of the Organization of American States, where a majority of nations backed Rafael Correa's decision. Correa, who, by the way, on Twitter, the Ecuadorian president, who tweeted, "Nothing will scare us" on his Twitter page. And it's interesting how suddenly, Ulrike Kohlmeier, that Ecuador is suddenly a major player in this story.
It's so ironic that Assange turns himself to a country which has not really a great record on press freedom. So I think it's a very weird combination to have Ecuador in this game now, and it looks to me very lot as if Assange really likes to present himself as a victim and wants to continue the story, and he could just go back to Sweden, and he's not even charged, and the US haven't even said that they really want to get him extradited, and Sweden wouldn't really do it because there are European laws. They wouldn't let him do it if he's really facing death penalty. So there's not really a reason why he shouldn't just go back.
And Korea's remarks, by the way, sparking a long-distance Twitter battle with the Swedish foreign minister, Carl Bildt, who says Ecuador seems to be in the news these days, and he offers a handy link to Freedom House's report on Ecuador's crackdown on the press. Of course, in the middle of all of this, Mathieu Mabin, are the British, obviously. What are they going to do about all this?
I do remember. Assange was speaking in the Frontline Club in London, and I do remember the British were quite divided about the fact that he was revealing some very secret information. There was this fight between those people who were supporting the freedom of speech and also the one who say that all the secrets are not good to reveal, and some secret must be kept in diplomacy or intelligence, and it also can be a question of security for a lot of people. So it's quite hard, and one point is sure that to see Ecuador today to be on Mr. Assange's side is quite funny and ironic.
They said the same thing after Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, that it's going to be end of the world. But I have a question. Has anyone else noticed?
A quick one, because we're out of time.
How Julian Assange has aged during this entire situation over the past year? His hair has turned from yellow to gray. So there must be something about the Ecuadorian embassy that's getting to him.
All right, we'll continue to monitor his appearance when we see him finally. I want to thank you for that, Michael Kirtley, Mathieu Mabin, Ulrike Kolderman, and Stephen Erlinger. We want to thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.